Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Season 6, Episode 18 of the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast. I'm Ryan Woldt, and this is the show where I bring you the stories of coffee professionals, entrepreneurship, and coffee education. Today, I'm airing a special Coffee Smarter recap episode. I'm actually out of town acting as a guest barista at TrailFest, a San Diego Mountain Biking Association fundraiser and campout here in Southern California. I had planned on just taking a week off from the show. We're near the end of the season, and frankly, a break sounded pretty good to me. But while I was hosting an event last weekend, a listener came up and said, "I wish you would do a show about water," which got me a little confused because I was pretty sure that I had. I came home, checked the archives, and you know what? I was right. We've done 2 water-heavy episodes on this show, including the second Coffee Smarter session ever way back in Season 1. And I know that was a long time ago, and we have new listeners now, and so much content to work through in the archives. So instead of taking the week off completely, I cut together this episode featuring conversations with both Chris O'Brien of Coffee Cycle Roasting and Siri Simran Khalsa of Lofty Coffee. In the first, with Chris, we cover some very basic topics like how hot water should be, what ratio of water to coffee should we use, and so on. In the second, with Siri, we go deeper into what is happening in the coffee blooming phase of brewing, which is the moment when the water and coffee interact for the very first time. Then we go a little bit more in depth in what the Specialty Coffee Association says about water for coffee. These conversations will sound a bit different from each other, and probably from this recording right now. For the first, I wasn't recording in the closet studio back then, and I certainly wasn't as worldly and podcast smart as I am now, or at least I am aspiring to be now. But what our Coffee Smarter experts are sharing is still great information. And I hope you enjoyed this Coffee Smarter session with coffee expert Siri Simran Khalsa, Executive Director of Lofty Coffee Company, and Chris O'Brien, founder and head roaster of Coffee Cycle Roasting. Chris, welcome back to Roast West Coast. I'm excited and shocked that you came back.
I am too, honestly. I'm a little shocked, but I just couldn't help myself. I had to help educate you about coffee. It was like a moral imperative.
I feel like you saw what a lost cause I was on the first one, and you thought this will be the thing that gets me some like good karma points for the week.
Ryan, I've known you were a lost cause for a long time.
Moving on. This week, I want to ask you 3 things about water, because water is essential to everything, but especially to coffee. When we're brewing coffee in the morning, does the ratio of water to coffee beans matter? Does the length that the beans sit in that water matter? And is there a rule about how hot that water should be?
Well, this is a great set of questions because, as you pointed out, water is most of what we're drinking when we drink coffee. That being said, drink water with your coffee too, because you do need to stay hydrated, and coffee and alone will not do it. But yes, water is the most important thing other than coffee that you're putting into the drink. So to answer your questions, the ratio of water to coffee beans, does it matter? Absolutely. There are organizations out there that do nothing but coffee. And the main one that we talk about in the coffee business is the Specialty Coffee Association. Specialty Coffee Association has a specific ratio of coffee to water that they say is ideal. That ratio is 16 to 1, 16 grams of water for every 1 gram of coffee beans. Most people at home probably aren't weighing their water or weighing their coffee. Maybe they are. That's great. People do it with tablespoons, teaspoons, cups, quarts, whatever it is, the lines on your coffee maker. But yes, basically, you don't have to be the SCA 16 to 1 perfect. I even prefer my coffee often at a 15 to 1 to a 16 to 1. But basically, find a ratio that you like and stick with it. As with anything, only change one variable at a time. So if you're changing your ratio, don't mess with your length of brewing time or temperature of water, which were the other 2 questions you asked me. So ratio, does it matter? Yes. Is there a perfect ideal ratio? SCA says yes, and it's 16-1. But really what matters most is, do you like it? If you do, stick to that ratio.
And I'll just jump in and say that when you talk about most people maybe not measuring at home, I never measured at home until I learned that. I bought like a $10 kitchen scale off of Amazon, which kind of felt guilty about because I'd rather go to the local hardware store, but we're in a pandemic. So I ordered it and I measured basically once and just made some little marks on like all my different, on my French press and on my thing. And so now I just dump it into that so I know what I'm doing.
I love it. That sounds great. Yeah, I would eyeball it back before I owned a scale. I'd look at the level. Usually French press was what I used to use, and I'd say, okay, if I fill it up the depth of my thumb knuckle, and then fill it up to the top, and that was how I did it back then. But yeah, you just find some way to be consistent about it, and that's your ratio.
Okay, so we still have the length of brewing and the temperature to talk about.
Exactly. So the length of brewing doesn't matter. Yes, it does. Ryan, you like to belittle your own coffee knowledge, but obviously you set me up some good questions here. So the length of brewing matters. It will change a bit depending on your brewing method and how much you're brewing. So if you're brewing 2 gallons for your local church gathering, or if you're at a shop and you're brewing 1.5 gallons, or if you're brewing just a cup for yourself, those might change a little bit. But generally, if you want to simplify it, you always want to be brewing somewhere between 3 and 6 minutes. That's pretty good up to like 1 gallon or so. So 3 to 6 minutes. So a French press, you're doing like 4 to 6 minutes. If you have one of those little pour over things like, the Melita cone that your grandma had, or the Hario V60 or Chemex that your hipster friend has down the hallway, that's going to be 3 to 4 minutes, maybe 5. But yeah, 3 to 6 minutes is a great brewing time. It does relate to how fine you grind the coffee, how small the pieces of particles of coffee are. But it's nice to simplify it and just say, hey, 3 to 6 minutes, find the time that you like best for the thing that you do consistently every day. Find that time and stick with it. And again, only mess with one variable at a time.
And can I assume that leaving it in for longer on the 6-minute side, how does that affect the flavor versus shorter?
No, that's great. When you brew it for too short, it can often taste sour or metallic. When you brew it for too long, it tastes, usually people describe it as tasting too bitter. It's a funny thing to say because all coffee tastes bitter, but there's good bitter, right? Like dark chocolate is bitter, but we like dark chocolate. I mean, maybe you're more of a milk chocolate guy. I'm not here to judge. Bitter is not necessarily a bad flavor, but there are flavors that come out that people tend to describe as bitter when you brew it for too long. If you brew it at 7 minutes or 8 minutes, a lot of those flavors are better described as astringent, which can be like drying in your mouth, like tannic, like a really tannic wine, or just kind of mouth puckery, not sour, but there's a bunch of ways that coffee can taste bad. If you've ever gotten that diner coffee, you probably have experimented with some of them. But yeah, if you want to make the best cup of coffee possible, you just stick to that 3 to 6 minutes. You go too far, it tastes rubbery, bitter, astringent, asphalty, however you want to describe it. If you do too short a time, less than 3 minutes, it might taste sour, it might taste salty, it might taste metallic.
Got it. Okay. So last thing was temperature.
Temperature. All right. Temperature is one of my favorites because, coffee science has kind of changed a little bit in the last decade or two. We started using tools in the coffee industry that other industries have had access to that we didn't have access to. But again, just to simplify it down and not get too into it, as you know that I am prone to do. Temperature, there's a minimum temperature that we like for brewing coffee. It's 195 degrees. Some people will tell you that you don't want to go over 204 or over 208. I say screw that. Anywhere from 195 to 212 is going to be just fine. All right. The only complication that you get from temperature is people talk about cold brew. Well, I want to brew cold brew in my refrigerator or on my countertop. And that's great. If you want to do it in your refrigerator or on your countertop, you're going to need a lot more time. So I said 3 to 6 minutes. If you're doing it with cold water, that ain't going to cut it. You're going to want 12 to 24 hours. So yeah, you want to stick to that 195 to 212 if you're brewing anything hot. And if you're trying to do some sort of cold brew method, then you're going to want 12 to 24 hours because the water temperature isn't hot enough to get everything in that short amount of time. You need a lot more time.
Well, I think that's going to take us right up to the limit for today. Chris, thank you again for joining me. Thank you for coming back, and I look forward to chatting with you again next week.
Oh, it's always a treat, Ryan. I'm always so happy to share this coffee knowledge with you and talk about coffee. And heck, I'm even drinking coffee right now. Talk to you soon, bud.
That sounds wonderful.
Oh, thank you. I like when things sound wonderful to you, and I'm glad that you're back here on the show, the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast, which I'm obligated to say 25 times in every episode. I promised you last time that we talked that we would get a little coffee nerdy today, so I'm going to ask you a more sciencey question today. What happens during the bloom during the brewing process? And for anyone listening, my understanding of the bloom is if I fine grind some coffee to do a pour over, like when the hot water first hits it and it kind of starts to bubble and it kind of crusts over a little bit, that's what I think is the bloom, but maybe correct me if I'm wrong. And what is happening in that process?
Yeah, so to my understanding and how I would be, teaching or training someone in a cafe setting or in a podcast setting about what blooming your coffee is. So, we can step back into the previous stage before coffee is even brewable, and that's being the roasting process. So, as we're roasting the coffee, as the the matter within the coffee starts to expand and change in the heat application and roasting process, there's a buildup of CO2 in the coffee beans. And from the moment the coffee is roasted to about, some people say 10 to 14 days, some may say even longer on lighter roasts, coffee is going to become more porous and it will actually start to degas and release that CO2 buildup. And that's why some people say, let your coffee rest or degas before you brew it, so that there's a let off of the built up carbon dioxide.
And that's there on some coffee bags, there's a little vent. Is kind of the same thing? I always wondered this. Is that because that gas is being released from those beans as they're sitting in the bag? Is that so the bag doesn't explode?
Yeah. So actually that's funny you asked, because at Lofty there was a period we had some faulty bags, and that we would, bag freshly roasted coffee and the bags would balloon up. But they were faulty in the sense that they had this one-way valve on it. And so that valve that you see, it allows air and gas out, but doesn't allow it in, because we can talk about that too. But coffee being in contact with oxygen starts to oxidize, and also in ways can degas quicker. And with that, it essentially will lose some of its nuances more quickly. So it allows that CO2 and gas to release, but it doesn't allow any air back in.
Got it.
So that kind of brings me what we're doing. So once we've had that roasted coffee, maybe it's degassed a little bit, we're going to grind that coffee, to brew, as you mentioned. And actually in the grinding process, we also have a lot of off the gases kind of releasing and oxidization happening. And that this can go, we're creating more surface area and more area for that oxygen to come into contact with. So we're also getting our coffee to degas a lot quicker at that stage. And this is also why you always want to brew your coffee pretty closely after you've ground it. Once you've ground it, it's going to start interacting with the elements around it, which the longer you have ground coffee just sitting there, the less nuanced, the less aroma it might have, because we're letting those gases off really quickly. So now getting to the bloom aspect, to my understanding, bloom is actually a particular way of brewing. You might, let's say you just pour water on top of your coffee and you're done. There's going to be a degassing period in that, but I wouldn't call that the bloom. And that the bloom is actually a particular thing that you're going to do at the very beginning of your brew. And what we're going to do is pour water just so your coffee grounds are saturated, but not that the water is like flowing through the coffee grounds. So it's just enough in most recipes, it's about twice as much water to coffee in the bloom. So if we do 20 grams of coffee, you might do 40 grams of water. Once that hot water comes in contact with those grounds, you're going to start to it's very logical in the sense you see bubbles coming up from your coffee bed, and that is CO2 being released from the coffee. That water speeds up that degassing process. Sorry, I forgot to mention with the bloom, usually you'll pour that water and maybe you'll wait for a period of time. Maybe you'll wait 30 to 45 seconds to allow those gases to release. And some of the reasons we do this is that CO2 let off is going to actually push the water away from the coffee grounds, which is going to not extract the coffee in that moment. So by letting those gases kind of come out, when we go to finally start our pour over or our brew, we've let a lot of those gases out. So now the water is going to be able to interact with the coffee a bit more, which is going to allow us to, extract all those great flavors and aromas and tastes from the coffee.
That's so interesting because I just assumed that it was going to be a science thing I wouldn't understand, where the water hits the grinds and this chemical is released to create a flavor. But it's actually because by when you release that gas, if you just keep pouring the water into it, the gas is actually pushing the water away physically from the grind itself, where the flavor is trying to get, is that we want to get out.
Exactly.
I feel like I had an aha moment right now. That's very cool.
Yeah, I agree. It's all there. It's all very simple. And sometimes you just need those that simple explanation. It's not too complicated. One more thing to mention, and for those of you brewing at home, I think it's always great to experiment, because I do know some YouTubers and other people who are like, you know what, I actually like my coffee better without the bloom, or they find a particular brew method is nicer without the bloom. And so, maybe if you're a go-to pour over V60 method, try one brew with a bloom and one brew without a bloom and see what differences you see there. For us at Lofty, we did quite a bit of experimentation with this in particular, and we always found that we got a bit more nuance and a bit more sweetness and a bit more body from the ones that we did a bloom with. So in our recipes, in our cafes, we use a bloom. But one more thing to mention is that typically CO2 may have a bit of a sour flavor to it. So you can perhaps get more sweetness and less of that kind of sour taste from it. I don't know if any of you have ever, or Ryan, if you've ever made a pour over with coffee, 24 hours after the roast, or less than 12 hours. Sometimes in the roasting setting, we're we got to taste this coffee. We need to taste it and see how it is. And so maybe it's only been 10 or 12 hours and we'll make a pour over. And even though you do a bloom, you can still, you have that little gassy flavor to it. And I would probably attribute that to the CO2 in the coffee. Very much a fresh roasted coffee flavor.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the idea that there's kind of a window of time where a coffee will be the best representation of itself. It's generally not the first day after roast. It's a couple of days, for a period of about a week, and then you're slowly starting to fade away from that. But also important, I think, to remind people that just because a coffee isn't in its peak window doesn't mean it's not good coffee or you shouldn't drink it. It just means it may not be the very most perfect, best representation of itself, and that's okay.
Yeah, and it kind of goes into the other topics we've talked in other episodes, about different instant coffee methods, or it's if you have, I mean, mind you, I have a bag of coffee, probably about 4 months old at this point. That's, definitely not what it was when I first got it, but if I need a cup of coffee in the morning, and I can still brew it and have a cup that's enjoyable.
Well, I think anyone, when I really first got into craft coffee and I was very obnoxious about it, I was like, oh, well, this isn't in the window. I'm not drinking this anymore, and I would give it to the neighbor or something.
Yeah. Or make cold brew. That's what I do. A lot of times I'll all the little bits and ends of coffee bags or coffee people get, I'll put into one thing and I'll make cold brew out of it. And you're like, you know what, this works.
That's part of that. I'm always amazed. I always think it's funny that people who work in coffee are generally less peculiar or particular about the coffee that they're drinking necessarily, because they also can extrapolate. Like, I think that's part of it. Like, I have more of a Ian Nelson used this term recently on the show called palate vocabulary,
Mm-hmm.
where if I drink a coffee that's 4 months old or 4 weeks old, and it isn't, perfect or isn't great, I can extrapolate a little bit more what it probably was like, and I'm not going to just dismiss that coffee forever because I had it out of its perfect window or whatever.
Totally.
I can appreciate it and understand based on the little bit of timeline that I understand, where that coffee might have come from, and enjoy it for what it is today.
Yeah.
As we're talking about the bloom, and we're talking about kind of this saturation of water, I wanted to ask you today about the water itself. I've done shows all about water, but I kind of specifically wanted to learn more about what the Specialty Coffee Association, the SCA, says about water. I tried to look at they have a PDF about water stuff online, and it was too complicated for me. I glazed over real fast and was really bored. So I'm hoping that you can explain a little bit better for me what they're thinking about coffee, about the water that's going into our coffee, and why it matters. I mean, I think I'm gonna ramble on for just a second, but I think we all realize that different places in the world have different tasting water, where a city might have a different water source. Where your water's coming from, is it being processed, how it's being processed. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, our elementary school went to a water processing plant to see that, and it was mostly, most kids kind of remember the part where they see sewage, which is kind of gross, but also those are in the same place. We are processing water generally at the same place. So what is the SCA saying about the water going to our coffee, and does it matter for somebody just at home?
Yeah, so I love this question, and actually, so I do some educational virtual classes, and this is a lot of times those folks, they don't know anything about brewing. They're either used to instant coffee or just the auto brewers or whatnot. And so this is something I try to bring a lot of attention to, because especially in specialty coffee, we do so much for that perfect, delicious cup of coffee. And in the sense of quality coffee beans, you go to a lot of specialty shops, are selling a $25 to $30 bag of coffee. There is so much being done for that one bag of coffee that if we're not considering the one other ingredient that's going into brewing, we're kind of not doing that coffee justice, right? Because when we're brewing, and actually at the end of the day, after you've brewed your espresso, your pour over, only about 2% to 3% of that cup of coffee is actually coffee at that point. The majority of it is actually water. So if you're thinking about also in a culinary sense, you have all these delicious local organic ingredients, and then you just use the factory farm chicken after that's you just you're putting a lot of emphasis on all these other ingredients and then kind of forgetting about a very important ingredient. And so it's important that when we brew with clean filtered water. That's typically where, if I'm teaching people brand new, don't know anything, just use clean filtered water and you'll get a decent result. But we could get further into it, and I'd say from my understanding, SCA has done a lot of research into knowing the exact mineral content and compounds within water to have the optimal extraction and flavor of coffee.
I would want to interrupt and just say that concept in and of itself is one that I don't think people are always thinking about, and I don't think about. When I pour a glass of water, I don't think this is actually filled with a whole bunch of stuff. I go, it's filled with water and it's clear, so there's nothing else in it. But that's just not true.
Yeah, exactly. And you made a great point, or like depending where you are in the world, you're going to have different contents or different amounts of different contents within that water. And so some of the few things we're looking for according to, the SCA standards is first, of course, a water that is odor free. So that's an easy one, right? We can smell the water. We know it's odor free. Maybe it's clean or fresh smelling. Second is like looking at the water, right? Like, can we see that it is clear and there's no off colors in that water? And then, I like in a cafe setting, we don't pay attention to this too much, but if we're talking about like SCA standards, they recommend a 7 pH of 7 of your water. And then there's things like alkalinity and sodium and calcium and chlorine that are a lot of times in perhaps tap water. And SCA has very specific standards to how much of each of that is. Like I have this written down here for us just so I get it right. But they're saying, total chlorine is going to be 0. And then the alkalinity being about 40 milligrams. And again, that pH being 7, and sodium being about 10 milligrams to a liter, we're talking. So that's going to be our ideal water. One way in a cafe setting we kind of maintain that is we use very high-end water filters. And again, speaking to Lofty's standard, we are calibrating and testing that filter on a weekly basis. And we're keeping the water, we measure it through parts per million. And what that does is it measures the parts per million within the solids within the water. And we're aiming for 120 to 130 in our calibration. So we're testing that just using a simple water TDS ppm meter, reading that and then adjusting as needed. But, something I'm going to backtrack a little bit because yes, we want really good water to extract, but what happens to the coffee when it isn't in this range? And I think that's something valid to address. And that being, if we have very hard water, so water that has a lot of mineral content, maybe it's a little cloudy looking, or perhaps it's tap water from San Diego. I can speak to our tap water is not, it's a bit harder on the harder end. When we go to brew coffee with that, you can, a lot of times, especially if that water has like already like perhaps not the cleanest flavor, when we can think of how that would result in the cup of coffee is that it might not have a very clean quality to it, that maybe the flavors are a little bit muddled. And I've even found that perhaps with really hard water, you're actually going to under extract your coffee because there's already so many solids within the water that when that water starts to try to extract solids from the coffee, I almost think of it as like there not being enough room in the water to hold all those solids because it's already taken up by all these minerals. And so you could have a muddled, kind of under extracted or like lacking clarity or like nuanced flavors in a cup of coffee that's brewed with harder water. And on the other hand, if we're using water that's very like soft, they call it soft water, like if you brewed coffee with just distilled water, I find that you're going to have a lot more like sharper flavors. And same thing, the way I think about it is just like, if there's only so much water and there's so much room in the water, there could be kind of more over extracted flavors using a very soft coffee or soft water. As well, in my experience, I've found sometimes you get a little bit of like a metallic flavor from very soft waters. So those are things like if you're finding these kind of qualities in your brew, perhaps that's your water quality. But then going back to that like ideal water, there's also some really cool products out on the market. Again, if you're wanting to have perfect brewing water, Ryan, have you ever heard of third wave water?
I have not.
They're not the only ones out there, but they definitely are very popular. They were the first that I ever saw, but they're essentially just like these little packets of minerals that are made to have just the right amount, kind of according to that SCA standard. And you, according to whichever size packet you have, you get a certain amount of distilled water. You just add that mineral to the distilled water, and that will be an ideal, quote unquote, the perfect water to brew specialty coffee.
What it's reminding me of is, and I know I do this all the time, everyone, I am sorry, but I refer to the beer industry because it's just something I knew for so long, but especially larger breweries, think your Budweisers or your Miller Lights or Miller's, Coors, a lot of times they'll bring water in and then essentially run it through a process where they remove all of those minerals out, and then they add them back in, kind of like what you're saying with this distilled
Yeah.
third wave. Like they can take in local water and they essentially run it through a process, remove everything, and then add the minerals back in that they want. And that's part of the reason they're able to keep their beer consistent, even though
Mm-hmm.
it's being produced all over the country in different places, because their base, their foundation ingredient of water is the same no matter what. And that's kind of what that reminded me of, was just this idea that they kind of strip away all of those local flares and start with something that they've created, which kind of makes me wonder if there's actually an appeal for some coffee people to get coffee in certain regions because of the local, flavor, because it is unique. I do notice sometimes, like if I buy a bag of your, say, Morning Glory coffee and I have it at your shop, I might love it there and then make it at home and be like, oh, I should just go to the shop because it's not as good when I make it
Yeah.
myself. And there's a million variables that could be, but it could be that maybe my water isn't filtered that day or whatever. But is there any benefit to say no? Like I'm going to use the local water, and this particular coffee is better because I'm doing that, or is that just me being romantic about it?
That's an interesting question. I think that goes into like, I definitely, I'll admit I don't know the answer to that, but it's like it's a great prompt for like an experiment, where I'm wondering like perhaps maybe on the roast level, depending on how light or how dark it is, maybe like a certain, I'm almost thinking like maybe a dark roast would maybe do better with like a little bit of a harder water, or like, I think maybe the roast has something to do with it, but I'm not sure. I don't know.
Well, that's what I'm going to be marinating. I think
Yeah.
I don't know that there is a right answer to it. I mean, but I'm thinking just about like parts of the world that maybe gravitated towards coffee faster.
Mhm.
Maybe it was because their water quality, maybe it tasted better
Yeah.
when they brewed it, and seems like there could be a correlation, and it could just be me imagining things. Before I let you go today, because I know we're on a bit of a tighter timeline than normal, I wanted to ask you about Lofty. We're in fully into summer, or June gloom, as it's known here.
Mhm.
What's kind of new for you guys? What have you been building up to? What's in line for Lofty? Anything new and exciting people should know about?
Yeah, there's quite a lot actually. We have the most epic single origin lineup of coffee right now that I'm initially, when we launched it, I was a little nervous because it was the most most single origin options we've ever had. Usually we keep it to like 3 to 4 options, and right now we have, I'm gonna have to remember exactly. I think we have 7 single origin options, which it's the most we've ever had. And again, I was a little nervous initially, like, how is our customer base going to respond to so many options? And it has been going really well. And I was wondering, seeing, with more options, are we going to start to like sell less coffee, in the sense, like move through our coffee more slowly? And I will say, I don't think that's been the case. And it's it's been interesting to see how having those options for a wider set of tastes has done us amazing. It's been amazing. And it's also fun in the cafe setting because there's just so many options. So you can have a different coffee all the time. I can run us through. We have 2 coffees from Ethiopia, and I love doing like one washed and one natural because it's a great way of being like, hey, these are 2 coffees from the same or similar regions, but they're just processed differently. So you can kind of do like a little tasting with a friend if you wanted, and kind of see how the processing method affects the flavor. Then we have one of the coffees I'm the most excited about is a coffee from Papua New Guinea, which I find that coffee origin to be fascinating. And this coffee is so delightful. It tastes like grilled pineapple and brown sugar. It's just delicious. Then we have a coffee from longtime partners. They're the Chacon family from Costa Rica, from a farm called Las Lajas. And we have a natural processed coffee from them. And then we have a delightful, approachable, washed Peruvian coffee. We have a washed Guatemalan from the Prentice family I was telling you about. The farm's called Finca de Dios. And what else? I think we have one. It's a lot.
Yeah, this is why we need to have a like coffee passport, or like an untapped, but for coffee, where all of these are collated somewhere. Or collated is not the right word, but they're all collected, and we can go and start checking them off. And like,
that would be awesome.
I don't use Untapped, which is like a beer rating app to track what you do, because I find that I get competitive, and I just want to try more things instead of actually like really. It's more about quantity than quality for me. That's just me. Nothing against the app, but I feel like with coffee, that would be a great way to start learning origins, and also start learning like what it is that I'm finding appealing. Like, do I notice that I start rating this origin, like, Ethiopia coffees this way more consistently versus this way, which is hard to track. If you're just, when you buy a bag of coffee and you drink a bag a week, or you go to a couple coffee shops. So.
Yeah, definitely takes a lot of notation.
Yes, I have so many notepads now. Siri, thank you so much for coming back and talking coffee with us. I am always so grateful for your time and just your knowledge, and thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Like I said, it's always a delightful way to spend my weekend, chatting with you about the thing that I love and totally nerding out and coming. You always have amazing questions that I feel like I don't always ask myself. And so I always find our conversations to be very thought-provoking and keep me on my toes, which is important for me in where I'm at in my journey through coffee. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm glad I could be of service. You're welcome. Okay, to recap, water is the main ingredient in coffee and very important to the end result. Chris and Siri are both much smarter about coffee than I. And finally, I'm still out in the woods instead of being home in the Closet Podcast studio. Thanks for listening to this water recap, and for going to roastwestcoast.com and signing up for this show's newsletter. If you find value there, please subscribe, free or paid, although paid subscriptions are how we grow this podcast. A special shout out to Lil Baggins Coffee. Thank you for subscribing earlier this week. I also need to thank Cafe Laterre, Steady State Coffee Roasting, Camp Coffee Company, Coffee Cycle Roasting, Ignite Coffee Company, Maria Coffee, Cape Horn Coffee Importer, Zumbar Coffee and Tea, Mostra Coffee Company, and Ascend Coffee Roasters, all great industry partners. Thank you for listening and supporting this show. This episode of the Roast West Coast Coffee Podcast has been written, produced, and recorded by me, Ryan Woldt. I hope that this episode has found you happy, healthy, and with at least enough sanity to make it through the day. Always tip your baristas, and be sure to drink good coffee.